What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's #2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. It is increasingly clear that regulators are trying to soften the bite of some of their restrictions on property developers as Beijing tries its best to handle the current crisis. But there is a catch. New policies appear to disproportionately benefit state-run enterprises. Reports from the last 2 days claim that regulators have told Chinese exchanges that quote-unquote high-quality developers can apply to issue new special financing instruments to repay outstanding debt. High quality is not defined, however. The rule that limits the size of new interbank bond issuance by developers to 85% of their outstanding interbank debt also looks to be relaxed. New data shows that Chinese real estate developers have issued more bonds in the first week of November than the whole of October combined. However, Chinese financial media is reporting that the companies involved are all state-owned enterprises. The People's Bank of China, China's central bank, published data yesterday showing that mortgages in October surged after relaxation in home lending rules, thus bringing much-needed demand to the real estate industry. Private developers are still feeling the pressure, though. Some creditors of Kaisa Group haven't received the bond interest due last week, starting the clock on a 30-day grace period before a default. Now let's turn to China's economy generally. We have more data from the month of October. Industrial production was up in October by 3.5% compared to last year, and by an average of 5.2% a year compared to 2019, higher than expectations but still quite low. Retail sales, a proxy for consumption, grew faster than industrial production in 2021, but still lags when looking over the last 2 years. In October, exports grew in RMB terms by 20.3% year on year, and imports by 14.5%. For this year's Double 11 shopping period, e-commerce giant Alibaba Group saw record low growth in gross merchandise volume, GMV, which dipped below double digits for the first time to hit 8.45%. Now, is this representative of wider consumption trends in the economy, or just representative of Alibaba's performance? We'll need a few more months to know. After several months of mixed economic data, however, it seems the government at least believes, publicly at least, that there has been some considerable stabilization in October. The National Bureau of Statistics expressed, quote, "Generally speaking, in October, the national economy was stable and maintained the trend of recovery," end quote. Now, moving on, in the last China update, we discussed the virtual meeting between General Secretary Xi Jinping of China and US President Joe Biden. Over the last 2 days, there has been a lot of Chinese state media coverage of the so-called 3 principles and 4 priorities which Xi laid out in his exchange with President Biden. Since there has been so much attention on this formulation, and since it was directly communicated from Xi to Biden, it was communicated between these 2 leaders, I think we should have a look at what was discussed and how it's being covered on the Chinese side. The full title of this formulation is The 3 Principles and 4 Priority Areas for China-US Relations. The 3 principles are: 1. Mutual respect for each other's, quote, social systems and development paths, core interests, and right to develop, end quote. So number 1 is mutual respect. Number 2, peaceful coexistence, and 3, win-win cooperation. These are the Chinese terms. We should recognize these ideas as officials in Beijing have been using them quite often over the last year and a half. Unsurprisingly, these principles are quite vague when it comes to definition. Both state-run Global Times and Xinhua Media have claimed that the US and China agree on 2 and 3, that is win-win cooperation and peaceful coexistence. But, again, according to the state media in China, the US fails to accept the first principle, the principle of mutual respect. Xi didn't define what mutual respect means, but state media has. For example, yesterday, the Global Times wrote, quote, "The US has continuously interfered in China's domestic affairs, such as Hong Kong and Xinjiang matters, and showed no respect to China," end quote. Thus, this principle, in part at least, is just a recycling of the old demand, it seems, of quote, not interfering in China's internal affairs, end quote. As for the 4 priorities within the US-China relationship from Beijing's perspective, Xi expressed that these are, and I'll quote them verbatim, quote, shouldering responsibilities of major countries and leading a global response to outstanding challenges. 2, acting in the spirit of equality and mutual benefit. 3, managing differences and sensitive issues in a constructive way to prevent China-US relations from getting derailed or out of control. And finally, 4, strengthening coordination and cooperation on major international and regional hotspot issues to provide more public goods to the world. End quote. Moving on. The historical resolution, or to use its full title, quote, the resolution of the CPC Central Committee on the major achievements and historical experience of the party over the past century, end quote, was published to the public yesterday. Now, we covered the importance of this resolution, this historical resolution for Xi Jinping and his leadership going forward during the critical 6th plenum meeting that was held last week. Now that this resolution has been published publicly, we can now examine some of the other details to get a sense of the priorities for the party going forward. For example, General Secretary Xi Jinping's flagship foreign policy initiative is enshrined in the document. Quote, adhering to the principle of achieving shared growth through consultation and collaboration, China has promoted high-quality development of the Belt and Road Initiative, end quote, expressing that the Belt and Road Initiative is a, quote, widely welcomed public good and platform for international cooperation in today's world. The document signals that ideology work may be a priority going forward too. Quote, misguided ideas have often cropped up, such as money worship, hedonism, ultra-individualism, and historical nihilism, that is, rejecting Beijing's official historical narrative. Online discourse has been rife with disorder, and certain leading officials have demonstrated ambiguity in their political stance and a lack of fighting spirit, end quote. And very interestingly, the following was included too. Quote, the Central Committee has made it clear that failure in the cyberspace domain will spell disaster for the party's long-term governance. The party therefore attaches great importance to the internet as the main arena, battleground, and frontline of the ideological struggle, end quote. Anti-corruption work too seemed to be a strong theme in the document. Quote, the party has intensified efforts to address corruption that occurs on the people's doorsteps, hunt down corrupt officials who flee overseas and recover state assets they have stolen, and root out all corrupt officials, end quote. One final thing, common prosperity appears in the document strongly too, expressing, quote, with unswerving resolve, we will pursue common prosperity for all, suggesting that Beijing is serious about putting redistribution above GDP growth as an economic priority, or at the very least, evidence that GDP is no longer the primary performance indicator or metric for local governments. Hong Kong-based South China Morning Post is reporting that the European Union was set to announce a new policy this Friday for upgrading its trade ties specifically with Taiwan, and interacting with Taiwan on trade and economic issues generally, involving, quote, more regular meetings, collaboration on specific sectors such as semiconductors, and more visits by senior officials, end quote. The paper reports, however, that according to, quote unquote, multiple sources, the EU has postponed the announcement of this plan, and as there is internal debate on the European side about how to balance its relations with Beijing and Taipei. It's difficult to know how accurate this report is, but it's certainly interesting. We need to keep an eye on developments with this potential story over the next few weeks. Hey guys, if you're enjoying the content, don't forget to hit that like button. It's a massive help for a small YouTuber like myself. If you're watching this for the first time and you're enjoying the content, you're getting some value from the material, from the analysis, maybe consider subscribing, hit that bell notification, and you'll have the most up-to-date analysis when it's published. And as always, a massive thank you to my Patreon supporters. You guys rock. Thank you so much for supporting this small channel. It really means a lot. Cheers. And finally, let's turn to the People's Liberation Army, Chinese military. A new consensus among analysts is that China's third aircraft carrier, commonly known as the Type 003, may launch in the coming months, showcasing the incredible speed in which China is developing and building its aircraft carriers and its carrier capacity generally. Civil satellite imagery of the relevant Chinese shipyard in late October reveals that the carrier's main external components are nearing completion. The Type 003 vessel is a leap forward in capabilities and technology for China. Compared with the first two carriers, the Liaoning and the Shandong, which are frankly obsolete. The Type 003's new CATOBAR, C-A-T-O-B-A-R launch system enables the employment of heavier fixed-wing aircraft, meaning more fuel and more payload. We should note Chinese carriers are still far behind US supercarriers in terms of technology and firepower. The US also has 20 carriers to China's soon-to-be 3. In fact, Japan has more carriers with 4. However, with the speed in which China is building these improved carriers, the People's Liberation Army Navy, PLAN, is certainly trying hard to reduce the size of that gap. While we are on military technology, there is speculation that the PLAA, the People's Liberation Army Air Force, is about to announce its next generation H-20 strategic bomber. Based on leaked information, analysts believe that the new bomber may have adopted a stealthy flying wing design that can help it strike targets beyond the second island chain. Okay guys, that is this episode of China Update. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you throw your comments below. As always, I always love hearing from you guys. Wherever you are, I hope you're keeping safe and keeping sane. I will see you next time on China Update.